Imagine a world where a mysterious illness sweeps across continents, leaving devastation in its wake. This was not a mere figment of imagination, but a grim reality that unfolded in the 14th century. The Black Death, as it came to be known, was a pandemic of unprecedented scale and horror. Villages are deserted, cities fall silent, and the very air seems thick with fear. The once bustling marketplaces and lively streets turned into ghostly echoes of their former selves. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional tolling of church bells, signaling yet another soul lost to the plague. This was the reality of the Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. It claimed the lives of an estimated 75 to 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and Africa. The sheer scale of the mortality was staggering, with some regions losing up to 60% of their population. It struck in the 14th century, killing millions and forever changing the course of civilization. The plague did not discriminate. It took the young and old, the rich and poor, the pious and the sinner alike. Entire families were wiped out and communities were left in tatters. The Black Death was more than just a disease. It was a crisis that touched every aspect of life. The social fabric of medieval society was torn apart. Traditional roles and hierarchies were upended as the plague decimated the population. The labor force was drastically reduced, leading to economic turmoil and a shift in power dynamics. People were bewildered by its swift and deadly nature. The speed at which the disease spread and the high mortality rate left little time for communities to react. Panic and confusion reigned as people sought answers and solutions in a world that seemed to be unraveling. They didn't understand what caused it or how to stop it. The medical knowledge of the time was rudimentary, and the true nature of the plague eluded even the most learned scholars. Various theories and treatments were proposed, ranging from the plausible to the absurd, but none could stem the tide of death. The Black Death remains a haunting reminder of the power of disease and the fragility of human life. It serves as a stark illustration of how vulnerable humanity can be in the face of nature's wrath. The images of mass graves and deserted towns are etched into the collective memory of humankind. The plague's impact extended far beyond its immediate death toll. The economic consequences were profound, with trade routes disrupted and agricultural production plummeting. The scarcity of labor led to higher wages for workers, altering the economic landscape and contributing to the decline of the feudal system. It reshaped societies, economies, and even the way people thought about the world. The Black Death prompted a re-evaluation of existing beliefs and practices. It spurred advancements in medicine and public health, as societies sought to prevent such a catastrophe from happening again. The Black Death is a dark chapter in human history, but it's also a story of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring human spirit. In the face of unimaginable loss and suffering, people found ways to rebuild and move forward. Communities came together to support one another, and the lessons learned from the pandemic paved the way for future generations to better understand and combat disease. The Black Death, a devastating plague, began its deadly journey in the mid-1300s in Central Asia. Caravans traveling the Silk Road, a network of trade routes connecting east and west, unknowingly carried the disease. These routes, bustling with merchants and goods, became pathways for the plague to spread. As the caravans journeyed westward, they stopped at trading posts, their rats carrying fleas infected with the plague bacteria. These unsuspecting creatures would then mix with local rat populations, spreading the disease further. From Central Asia, the Black Death advanced towards Europe, unknowingly carried by travelers and traders. The Silk Road, meant to connect cultures and foster trade, unfortunately, became a conduit for one of the deadliest pandemics in history. The Black Death's journey from east to west highlights how interconnected the world was, even in the 14th century, and how quickly disease could spread. The Black Death, a terrifying plague that decimated populations in the 14th century, spread through a tiny but deadly carrier, the flea. These minuscule insects, often overlooked, played a pivotal role in one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. These fleas lived on rats, which were ubiquitous in medieval cities and ships. The close quarters and lack of sanitation in these environments created the perfect breeding ground for rats and, consequently, fleas. Ships, bustling with trade and travel, became vessels of disease, carrying infected rats from port to port, spreading the plague far and wide. When a flea infected with the plague bacteria Yersinia pestis bit a human, the disease could be transmitted. The bite of an infected flea was not just a minor irritation, it was a potential death sentence. The bacteria would enter the bloodstream, leading to a rapid and often fatal progression of the disease. There were three main forms of the plague, each causing different symptoms and varying degrees of suffering. The diversity in symptoms often made it difficult for medieval physicians to diagnose and treat the disease effectively. The bubonic plague, the most common form, caused painful swellings called buboes to appear in the armpits, groin, or neck. These swollen lymph nodes were not only excruciating but also a visible sign of the infection, often leading to fear and isolation of the afflicted. Septicemic plague infected the bloodstream, causing severe symptoms such as fever, chills, and the blackening of the skin due to disseminated intravascular coagulation. This form of the plague was particularly deadly, often killing its victims before the characteristic buboes could even develop. Pneumonic plague, the deadliest form, attacked the lungs, making breathing difficult and often leading to death within days. This form was highly contagious, spreading through respiratory droplets, which meant that it could be transmitted from person to person without the need for fleas or rats. Without knowledge of bacteria or effective treatments, people in the 14th century were helpless against the plague's spread. Medieval doctors, with their limited understanding of disease, resorted to various ineffective and often harmful treatments. The iconic plague masks, with their long beaks filled with aromatic substances, were a desperate attempt to filter out the miasma or bad air believed to cause the disease. The Black Death's mode of transmission highlights the significant role that seemingly insignificant creatures, like fleas and rats, played in shaping history. This pandemic not only decimated populations but also had profound social, economic, and cultural impacts, reshaping the course of human history in ways that are still felt today. The story of the Black Death is a stark reminder of how interconnected our world is and how small creatures can have a massive impact on the course of human events. In 1347, the Black Death reached the shores of Europe, carried by merchant ships arriving from the east. These ships, laden with goods and treasures, also harbored a deadly stowaway, the Yersinia pestis bacterium, which would soon unleash unprecedented devastation. The disease first appeared in port cities, quickly spreading inland through trade routes and travel. Merchants, travelers, and even animals unknowingly carried the plague from one town to the next, creating a web of infection that spanned the continent. The bustling trade routes that once symbolized prosperity now became conduits of death. The arrival of the plague in Europe marked the beginning of one of the darkest periods in the continent's history. Streets that were once filled with the sounds of commerce and daily life fell eerily silent as the disease took its toll. Town squares, once centers of community and activity, became places of fear and mourning. The Black Death's impact on Europe was catastrophic. The symptoms were gruesome: fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, terrible aches and pains, and then death. The sight of plague victims with their swollen lymph nodes and blackened skin struck terror into the hearts of those who witnessed it. Entire communities were wiped out as the plague swept through villages and cities. Homes were abandoned, fields left untended, and once thriving towns became ghostly remnants of their former selves. The social fabric of Europe was torn apart as families were decimated and survivors struggled to cope with the loss. With no known cure, people were terrified of the disease, and fear and panic gripped the land. Some turned to religion, believing the plague was a punishment from God, while others sought to blame and persecute minority groups, further deepening the social chaos. The sense of helplessness was pervasive as traditional medical knowledge proved utterly ineffective. The dead overwhelmed cemeteries, forcing mass graves to be dug to accommodate the sheer number of bodies. Burial rituals were abandoned, and the sheer scale of death desensitized many to the once sacred process of laying loved ones to rest. The landscape of Europe was dotted with these grim reminders of the plague's reach. The Black Death's arrival in Europe was a turning point in history, leaving an indelible mark on the continent's social, economic, and cultural landscape. The labor shortage caused by the massive death toll led to significant economic changes, including the end of the feudal system in many areas. Social structures were upended and the cultural psyche of Europe was forever altered. It is a stark reminder of the devastating power of infectious diseases and the vulnerability of human populations. The Black Death not only reshaped Europe in the 14th century, but also serves as a historical lesson on the importance of public health and the need for preparedness in the face of potential pandemics. The resilience of human societies, however, is also evident in the eventual recovery and rebuilding that followed this dark chapter. The Black Death transformed daily life in Europe. Fear and uncertainty permeated every aspect of society as people desperately tried to survive. Streets, once bustling with life, became eerily quiet as people avoided contact with others, fearing contagion. The relentless spread of the plague led to widespread chaos and breakdown of social order. With so many dead, bodies were left unburied in the streets, creating a horrific stench and further spreading disease. Basic services like sanitation and healthcare collapsed under the weight of the epidemic. The Black Death upended daily routines, traditions, and social norms. People lived in constant fear of falling ill, witnessing the deaths of loved ones, and experiencing the disintegration of their communities. The plague's impact on daily life was profound and terrifying. Like and subscribe to Epic Eras for more content.